Every Omega failed the Alpha King's mating ceremony until the Scorned healer. The kingdom of Valdoria was a place of mystery and whispers. Its towering castles rose like jagged teeth against the darkening sky, and the thick forests surrounding the kingdom hid secrets that even the bravest knights feared to uncover. Among all the legends told in hushed voices around fires, none was more feared than the curse of the Alpha King. Kale, the Alpha King, ruled with strength and precision. His gaze alone could command armies, and his voice could silence a hall full of nobles. But despite his power, Kale carried a shadow no crown could hide. Every Omega brought to the palace to unite with him in the sacred mating ceremony had failed. Some vanished in the night without a trace, others returned broken, unable to survive the bond that should have been their destiny. The people whispered that the king himself was cursed. The palace walls seemed to carry the echoes of past failures, and the air inside the grand halls was always tense with anticipation. In the quiet outskirts of the palace, in a small stone cottage where the forest's edge met the river, lived Leora. She was a healer, known for her skill and knowledge of herbs and remedies that others feared. Her hands could mend bones and soothe pain, but in the palace, her reputation was that of a woman with a strange, unorthodox touch. The nobles avoided her, not because of any ill intent, but because they sensed her power was different, dangerous even. And yet she was not afraid. She had learned long ago that fear could be a cage, and she had chosen freedom. Leora's days were quiet, spent mixing herbs and tending to those who sought her help. Yet beneath her calm exterior, there was a storm. She had been betrayed once by someone she trusted, and since then her heart had been cautious. Still, she longed for something more than her small cottage and solitary life, something that would give her existence meaning beyond healing wounds. It was on a day when the sky was painted with streaks of purple and gold that her life changed. A royal messenger arrived at her door, the seals of Valdoria glinting in the fading sunlight. He bowed deeply and handed her a scroll. Leora's fingers trembled slightly as she broke the wax seal and read the words. She had been summoned to the palace, not to serve the king directly, but to prepare for the upcoming mating ceremony as a healer. Her task was simple in description, yet fraught with danger. She was to be ready to save the king if the ritual caused him harm. The news sent a thrill through Leora's heart, though she would not admit it. The palace had always been a place of intrigue and danger, yet something about being chosen stirred a part of her she had long kept hidden. She packed her herbs, her healing salves, and her few personal belongings, feeling the forest watching her as she stepped onto the road leading to Valdoria. The palace itself was a marvel of dark beauty. Its towers rose high into the clouds, shrouded by mist and mystery. The walls were carved with ancient symbols, and the gates were guarded by armored knights who seemed more statue than man. As Leora walked through the grand halls, she felt the weight of history pressing down on her. Every tapestry told a story of kings and queens, victories and betrayals. Every torch flickered with shadows that seemed alive. Kale sat on his throne, his presence dominating the great hall. The moment Leora entered, the air shifted. She could feel the king's gaze on her, sharp and unyielding. He did not speak at first, merely observing her with a mixture of curiosity and something else she could not name. Leora kept her head high, refusing to let fear take hold. She had faced the sick and the injured, the cursed and the wounded. A king was no different. "The ceremony begins soon," Kale said finally, his voice deep and commanding. "Every healer before you has failed to protect those who attempt this bond. Do not join their ranks of failure," Leora bowed slightly. "I will do what I must, your majesty." There was no fear in her voice, only determination. She did not know why, but she felt an invisible thread pulling her toward this man, toward this moment. The hall was prepared for the ceremony. Candles lined the floor in intricate patterns, and magical sigils glowed faintly along the walls. their light pulsing like a heartbeat. The Omega brought forward was pale and trembling, her eyes wide with fear. The people of the court watched silently, their expectations heavy in the air. Leora's heart ached for the girl, sensing the terror that gripped her. The ritual began. Kale's power filled the room, a force both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The Omega stepped forward, reaching for the king's hand, but the moment their fingers touched, the room seemed to shudder. The air thickened, the candles flickered violently, and a low hum vibrated through the stone floors. The Omega gasped, staggering backward, her body trembling as if the power flowing between her and the king was too much to bear. Leora stepped closer, her hands ready to heal, but she felt something unexpected, a pull from the king, a magnetic force that seemed to call to her. She could not explain it, but in that moment, it felt as if the failure of every past Omega was no longer inevitable. She moved forward instinctively, reaching out, not to touch the Omega, but to touch the air around Kale, to ease the pressure of the magic that threatened to overwhelm him. The effect was immediate. The hum in the room softened, the candle's flame steadied, and Kale's eyes widened in surprise. The Omega, for the first time, did not falter. Her hands remained steady, her breathing calm. The court gasped. No Omega had ever survived the king's full power during the ceremony. Yet here in this room, something extraordinary had occurred. Kale's gaze found Leora's, and the world seemed to narrow until only the two of them existed. There was recognition in his eyes, a deep and primal understanding that went beyond words. Leora felt it too, a warmth spreading through her chest, a connection she could neither explain nor resist. When the ceremony ended, the Omega bowed before Kale, trembling but unharmed. The court erupted into whispers, some of awe, others of fear. Leora stepped back, her own pulse racing. She had done nothing remarkable, she told herself. She had only done what felt right. Yet she could not deny the strange bond that now seemed to exist between her and the king, a bond that no one had ever survived before. That night, Leora was given quarters in the palace. The room was modest, but it overlooked the courtyard where the moonlight danced on the fountains. She sat by the window, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had expected fear, danger, and perhaps even death, but instead she had felt something she had long buried: hope. Meanwhile, Kale paced the throne room, his mind racing. He could not shake the feeling that Leora was different from the others. She had not trembled before him, nor had she faltered under the pressure of his power. There was a fire in her, a strength that both intrigued and unnerved him. For the first time in many years, he wondered if the curse that had haunted him could finally be broken, not by another Omega, but by this healer who had entered his life so quietly, yet so boldly. As the night deepened, shadows crept along the palace walls. In the forest beyond, unseen eyes watched the castle. Some were drawn by the king's power, others by the unusual bond that had formed with the healer. Danger lingered like a mist, waiting for the right moment to strike. Yet within the palace, a spark had been ignited, a spark that could challenge curses, defy destiny, and perhaps change the fate of Valdoria itself. Leora closed her eyes, feeling the pull of the bond that had awakened during the ceremony. She did not understand it, and she did not yet trust it, but she knew one thing: her life had shifted irrevocably. The quiet healer who once walked alone was now entwined with the most powerful man in the kingdom, a man feared and revered, a man whose curse had defeated all who came before. And somewhere deep inside her, a thought formed, a thought both daring and frightening. Perhaps she was not just the healer anymore. Perhaps she was the one who could break the shadow over the Alpha King. The moonlight faded into the approaching dawn, casting a silver glow over the castle towers. Leora felt the weight of what was to come, but she did not shrink. She was ready to face whatever trials awaited, even if it meant stepping into the darkness alongside the king. For the first time, the kingdom of Valdoria had a glimmer of hope. And for the first time, Cale felt the stirrings of something he had thought lost forever: trust, longing, and perhaps the first fragile hint of love. But as the castle slept, a chill wind swept through the halls, carrying with it whispers of the past and warnings of what was yet to come. The shadows were watching, and they would not let the bond remain untested. Leora and Cale, connected by a force neither fully understood, were about to step into a world where love and danger were inseparable, and where the failure of every Omega before her was only the beginning of the trials to come. The first step had been taken. The rest of the journey would test their courage, their hearts, and the strength of the bond that now tied them together. And in the quiet of the palace night, the first chapter of a new legend began. The morning sun poured golden light across the palace of Valdoria, but within its walls, tension thrummed like a hidden drum. Leora sat at the edge of her small chamber bed, her hands wrapped around a cup of steaming herbal tea. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a vivid dream. She had not expected to survive the ceremony, let alone see the king's power remain controlled. Yet here she was, alive, and with a strange bond she could neither name nor fully understand. The palace was alive with whispers. Servants hurried through the corridors, their eyes darting toward the throne room where the council had already gathered. Nobles speculated in hushed tones about the healer who had endured the Alpha King's power without faltering. Some feared her, others were curious. Leora knew the court's attention was dangerous. In Valdoria, even a word spoken incorrectly could mean ruin or worse. Cale, meanwhile, sat in the throne room, silent and brooding. His gaze, dark as a storm cloud, followed every movement of the courtiers. The bond he had felt with Leora during the ceremony lingered like fire beneath ice, warming and dangerous all at once. He had ruled the kingdom with strength and precision, yet the presence of this healer unsettled him in ways he had never experienced. Her courage, her unshakable calm in the face of his power, had sparked something long buried inside him, a vulnerability he was unaccustomed to. The king's advisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Seraphine, approached cautiously. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice measured, "the court grows restless. They speak of the healer and of her connection to you. Some see it as a miracle, others see it as a threat." Cale's jaw tightened. "Let them speak. I care not for whispers." Yet even as he said it, his mind returned to the night before, Leora's steady hands, her unflinching gaze, the way she had calmed the overwhelming energy that had shaken the ceremony. A part of him feared the bond, but another part, the part he rarely acknowledged, wanted to understand it. Meanwhile, Leora walked through the palace gardens, the scent of roses and jasmine heavy in the air. She kept her eyes down, aware of the courtiers' curious stares. Her role was simple: heal if needed, observe, and remain unseen. But she felt the invisible weight of destiny pressing down upon her. She had survived the ceremony, yes, but the bond she now shared with the king was something she could neither ignore nor escape. It was during this walk that she first encountered Cale outside the grand halls. He was not dressed in his usual armor but in a simple tunic, his cloak brushing the cobblestones. His presence, even in simplicity, was commanding. Leora froze slightly, sensing the magnetic pull that had begun the night before. "You walk as if the garden belongs to you," Cale said, his voice low, almost amused. "I walk as I please," Leora replied, lifting her chin. She did not shy from his gaze, though her heart raced. There was a strange tension between them, like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap or bind them closer. Cale took a slow step toward her. "You should not be here alone. The palace is full of dangers you cannot see." "I am no stranger to danger," Leora said quietly. She had faced storms, wild beasts, and sickness. Yet she did not mention the unease that stirred within her, the unease that only Cale seemed to awaken. For several moments they walked in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Then Cale stopped and looked at her fully. "Tell me," he said, Why did you not falter during the ceremony? Every other Omega has failed. Yet you endured." Leora hesitated. Her mind raced, trying to find a truthful answer that would not reveal too much. "Perhaps I was not meant to fail," she said finally. "Or perhaps your strength did not frighten me as it did others." Kale's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment the hardness that surrounded him cracked. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," he admitted. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of honesty that few had ever earned. Days passed, and the bond between them deepened, though neither dared to speak it aloud. Leora tended to the palace, healing minor injuries and soothing those who suffered from the stress of court life. Kale watched from afar, fascinated by her calm authority and her unwillingness to bow to fear. He began seeking her counsel, not just as a healer but as someone who could see him as he truly was, flawed, burdened, and human beneath the crown. Yet danger lurked. The ancestors' curse that haunted the Alpha King did not rest quietly. Rumors of a shadowed spirit, long bound to the palace, began to circulate. Courtiers whispered of sightings in the halls, figures that vanished when approached, cold winds that swept through locked chambers, and flickers of strange light in the dead of night. The palace seemed alive with magic and warning, and Leora could sense it too. Her bond with Kale gave her glimpses of the energy surrounding him, chaotic, powerful, and potentially destructive. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a messenger arrived with urgent news. A neighboring kingdom sought to exploit Valdoria's current uncertainty, sending spies to infiltrate the palace. Leora listened carefully as Kale's advisors argued over strategy, their voices rising in panic. The Alpha King's expression remained stoic, but his eyes betrayed the concern that burned beneath. "You must remain here," Kale said to Leora later, when the hall emptied. "It is too dangerous for you to be exposed to the court's fears and the enemy's schemes." "I am no child," Leora replied firmly. "If danger comes to the palace, I will not hide. I will help where I am needed." Kale's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue to command her to safety, yet he could not deny the truth in her words. She had already faced the unimaginable during the ceremony. She was no ordinary healer. She was something else entirely. That night, the palace fell into uneasy quiet. Leora walked the corridors, checking on wards and injured guards, her senses alert. In the shadows, she felt a presence, not human, yet not entirely malevolent. It was as if the castle itself was testing her, probing for weaknesses. She tightened her grip on her healing staff, ready for whatever might appear. Suddenly, a disturbance erupted in the courtyard. Figures cloaked in black moved with precision, attempting to breach the inner walls. Leora acted instinctively. She ran to the scene, herbs and charms in hand, and found Kale already confronting the intruders. His power flared like a living storm, the air crackling with energy. Leora stepped forward, channeling her abilities to shield the guards and soothe the chaotic energy that threatened to overwhelm them. The battle was swift, and the intruders fled, leaving the courtyard in ruin. Kale stood beside her, his chest heaving, eyes locked on hers. The intensity between them had grown, not just from shared danger but from the unspoken understanding that had begun to form. Leora had saved him, yes, but in doing so, she had also awakened something within him, a recognition that their destinies were intertwined. "You are remarkable," Kale said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. His gaze lingered on her hands, her face, her unwavering stance in the face of danger. "You were born for this moment, for this bond." Leora felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not step back. "Perhaps we were meant to find each other," she replied softly. "Perhaps the bond is not only about power but about trust." For a moment, silence enveloped them. The air seemed to shimmer, carrying the weight of what had happened and what was yet to come. Neither spoke of the fear that lingered in their hearts, the fear that the curse was not gone, only waiting for the next moment to strike. The next day, Kale summoned Leora to his private chamber. Maps of the kingdom lay spread across the table, along with scrolls detailing the enemy's movements. "You are more than a healer," he said, his voice firm but carrying a new respect. "I need your insight. The palace is vulnerable, and I cannot face this threat alone." Leora studied the maps carefully. "The attackers will strike at the weakest point, the eastern gate. It is less guarded and the shadows of the forest can conceal them." Kale nodded slowly. "Then we must prepare. And we must trust each other completely." His gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, and for a fleeting moment the formalities of king and subject melted away. They were two forces, bound by fate and fire, standing together against danger and the unknown. As they planned, a subtle awareness grew in both of them. Their bond was no longer invisible, no longer a secret force beneath the surface. It pulsed between them like a heartbeat, guiding their actions, their decisions, their understanding of one another. It was dangerous, yes, but also exhilarating. That night, as Leora walked back to her chamber, she felt the wind shift, carrying a chill that spoke of unfinished business. Somewhere in the palace, the shadows moved, watching, waiting. She knew the trials were only beginning. The enemy outside the gates was a threat, yes, but the true test lay within the palace itself. The ancient curse, the court's fear, and the growing power of the bond she shared with Kale. And as she looked up at the moon, bright and full above the castle towers, Leora realized that she had not just survived the ceremony. She had stepped into a destiny far larger than she had imagined. She was no longer just a healer. She was a force, a guide, and perhaps the one who could save the king and the kingdom from the shadows that lingered in every corner of Valdoria. The castle slept under the silver light, but the night was far from peaceful. Whispers of power, warnings from the past, and the untested bond between healer and king stretched into the darkness, promising trials, revelations, and a connection that could change everything. And in the quiet of her chamber, Leora finally allowed herself a thought she had been avoiding. Perhaps she was not only meant to survive. Perhaps she was meant to change everything. But as the first light of dawn touched the palace spires, a faint shadow moved beyond the eastern gate, watching, waiting, and preparing. The next challenge was coming, and Leora and Kale would face it together or fall apart trying. The fire beneath ice had been lit, and nothing in the kingdom would ever be the same again. The sun rose slowly over Valdoria, casting long golden rays across the palace walls. The courtyard buzzed with activity as servants prepared for the day and guards polished their armor, aware that the kingdom's enemies were never far away. Yet, beneath the daily routine, a tension lingered, thick as the morning mist. Something had changed in the palace. The bond between Kale, the Alpha King, and Leora, the healer who had survived the mating ceremony, was no longer invisible. It was a force, subtle yet undeniable, and the walls themselves seemed to hum with the awareness of it. Leora moved through the halls with her usual calm, her fingers brushing the edges of tapestries and stone carvings. Her presence had become a quiet certainty within the palace, though the courtiers still whispered behind her back. They spoke of her as though she were a mystery wrapped in shadows, a healer who had survived what none had, whose courage had held steady against the overwhelming power of the Alpha King himself. And some, the more suspicious or fearful, called her dangerous. But Leora paid them little mind. Her focus was on Kale. He was no longer just a figure of fear or legend in her eyes. He was a man, carrying the weight of a kingdom, a curse, and a history he had never fully shared. She had begun to see the cracks in his armor, the rare moments when the stoic ruler's loneliness and doubt peeked through. She found herself drawn to these moments, not out of pity, but out of understanding. She recognized pain when she saw it, and Kale carried much. That morning, Kale called for her to meet him in the royal library, a vast hall of ancient tomes and scrolls. The room smelled of parchment and candle wax, and the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows created colored patterns on the floor. Kale stood at a large table, studying maps of the kingdom and notes about the enemy forces gathering beyond the borders. The tension in his posture was unmistakable, but there was also an openness, a willingness to include her in matters she had never imagined herself part of. "You are here early," Kale said, his voice steady but tinged with something unusual, curiosity perhaps, or even trust. "I could say the same about you," Leora replied, stepping closer to the table. Her eyes scanned the maps, taking in the symbols marking potential weaknesses along the borders. "You are preparing for the enemy, yet you invite me to see your plans. That is a rare show of trust for a king." Kale looked at her, his eyes dark and sharp. "I trust few," he said, "but I have learned that strength comes not from standing alone, but from recognizing who can stand beside you. You have proven yourself, Leora, and I need someone who sees what others do not." Their eyes met, and in that moment the weight of unspoken understanding passed between them. Leora's heart beat faster, though she fought to maintain her composure. She was a healer, trained to act with calm and precision, yet the presence of the Alpha King, his acknowledgement, and the strange bond that had begun to grow between them stirred something deep within her. A mixture of fear, admiration, and something that felt dangerously like longing. Kale pointed to the maps. "The eastern gate is weak. They will attempt another attack. I need your insight, not just as a healer, but as someone who can see patterns, who can anticipate danger." Leora studied the map carefully. Her fingers traced the lines marking the castle walls, the positions of the guards, and the surrounding forest. "If they strike at the eastern gate, they will try to use the shadows to hide. The forest provides cover, and the guards' attention will be divided. We must set traps and ensure the soldiers are ready." And she hesitated, glancing at him. "We should also be ready for something more. Magic may be used against us. I can help counter it." Kale's brow furrowed, a rare hint of concern crossing his face. "Magic?" he asked, though he already knew. He had felt her power, subtle yet strong, during the ceremony. And now, watching her move with quiet authority, he realized the truth. She was more than a healer. She was a force that could stand against not only the enemy's armies, but also the darker currents that lingered in the palace itself. That evening, as the palace settled under the silver glow of the moon, Leora walked the corridors, checking on the wounded and preparing protective wards along the eastern walls. The castle was quiet, but she sensed a shift in the air, a subtle vibration that warned of something approaching. It was not just the enemy outside. The shadows of the palace itself stirred. The curse that had haunted Kale and every Omega before her was not gone. It lingered, watching, waiting, testing. Kale appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. "You should rest," he said quietly. "You do not need to face this alone." "I am ready," Leora replied, her voice steady. "And I will not hide from what is coming. If danger arrives, I will face it." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, but remember, even the strongest cannot face every storm alone. Trust me as I trust you." Their hands brushed briefly as he turned to leave, and the spark of the bond between them flared, subtle yet undeniable. Both felt it, though neither spoke of it aloud. In the quiet of the night, they were connected in ways that went beyond words, through power, through understanding, and through a shared sense of destiny. The night deepened, and shadows moved beyond the eastern gate. Figures cloaked in black crept silently, using the forest for cover. Leora had prepared wards, yet she could feel the tension in the air, the pressure of unseen magic testing her defenses. The bond with Kale thrummed like a heartbeat in her chest, guiding her, alerting her to dangers she could not see with the eye alone. The attack came suddenly. The intruders, armed and silent, tried to breach the eastern wall. Guards rushed to defend the castle, but the shadows worked against them, creating illusions and confusion. Leora acted instinctively, channeling her abilities to shield the soldiers and counter the dark magic. Her hands glowed faintly, the power within her responding to the castle's need. Kale arrived, his presence like a storm unleashed. His power surged through the courtyard, cutting through the darkness, striking at the attackers with precision. Together, he and Leora moved as one, their actions perfectly synchronized, though neither had spoken a word. The bond between them guided their movements, their instincts aligned in a way that seemed almost magical. The intruders were driven back, but not without cost. Several guards lay injured and the courtyard was littered with debris. Leora knelt to tend to the wounded, her hands steady even as her heart raced. Kale stood beside her, watching but also keeping alert. There was a tension in the air, a reminder that the castle was never truly safe, and that the curse, though dormant, was still present. When the attack ended, silence settled over the courtyard. Leora looked up, her eyes meeting Kale's. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow until only they existed. The energy between them was palpable, a connection forged not just by shared danger but by something deeper, something neither fully understood. "You are remarkable," Kale said quietly, almost as if confessing a truth to himself rather than to her. "You faced the danger without fear. You were calm when others would have panicked." Leora felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. "I do what I must," she said simply. "And I will continue to do so." Kale's eyes softened, and for the first time he allowed himself to show a hint of vulnerability. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," he admitted. "You are not just a healer, you are necessary." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Leora did not move closer, yet she did not step back. She understood the truth in his words, even if neither spoke of it fully. They were bound, not just by magic or destiny, but by trust, understanding, and the subtle stirrings of something far more powerful, something that might grow into love. The next days passed in preparation. Leora and Kale worked closely, setting wards, training guards, and studying the movements of their enemies. Their bond deepened with every shared task, every glance, and every unspoken understanding. The court began to notice the change, the healer and the king, moving in harmony, facing threats together. Some admired it, others feared it, but all could sense the power that radiated between them, a force that even the oldest magic in Valdoria could not ignore. One evening, as Leora walked along the castle ramparts, Kale joined her. The moonlight shimmered on the battlements, and the wind carried the scent of the forest below. "Do you ever wonder," Kale said quietly, "why you survived when all others failed?" Leora paused, gazing out over the kingdom. "Perhaps it is not about surviving," she said. "Perhaps it is about standing when others cannot. And perhaps it is about being ready to face what comes, no matter the cost." Kale's gaze met hers, and for a moment the world seemed still. The bond between them pulsed, unspoken but undeniable. They were two forces, drawn together by destiny, by courage, and by the strange, growing power that connected them. But as they stood there, the castle silent beneath the stars, a shadow moved in the forest below, a reminder that the trials were far from over. The enemies outside the walls were only one part of the danger. The curse that had haunted the Alpha King, the forces that had tested every Omega before her, and the secrets hidden in the palace's darkest corners were still awake, still waiting, still ready to strike. Leora took a deep breath, feeling the bond that connected her to Kale, feeling the strength that had grown between them. She did not know what the future held, nor what dangers lay ahead. But she knew one thing: she would face them, side by side with the king, and whatever came next they would face it together. The night deepened, the wind whispered through the towers, and the palace settled into an uneasy quiet. But in the hearts of Kale and Leora, a fire had been lit, a fire of trust, of courage, and of a bond that might just overcome the shadows that had long haunted Valdoria. The true test was coming. And when it arrived, neither the curse nor the enemy would be able to stand against what had begun between the healer and the cursed king. The dawn broke over Valdoria with a soft, golden glow, but the castle was restless. Whispers of a new threat rippled through the halls, carried by the wind and the uneasy footsteps of the guards. The kingdom's enemies had grown bolder, but more dangerous than their armies was the ancient curse that had haunted the Alpha King for generations. Every Omega before Leora had failed against it, some vanishing into nothingness, others returning broken in body and spirit. Kale stood in the throne room, his eyes fixed on the intricate magical wards that Leora had prepared along the castle walls. For weeks they had trained together, planning for any attack, but the danger was not just outside the gates, it was within. The curse, a lingering shadow from the king's ancestors, stirred restlessly. It had felt the bond between him and Leora and now sought to test its strength. Leora entered quietly, carrying her healing herbs and magical charms. She had grown more confident in the palace, more attuned to Kale's moods, and more aware of the bond that had begun to grow between them. Yet there was still tension in her chest. The curse had never been fully understood, and she knew the coming trial could be the greatest test of all. "You are ready," Kale said quietly, turning to face her. His dark eyes held both concern and admiration. "The bond we share, it may be the only thing that can withstand what comes." Leora nodded. "I am ready," she said firmly. "I have survived the ceremony, faced intruders, and endured your power. Whatever this is, I will face it with you." Their hands brushed, a subtle spark igniting between them. Neither spoke of the feelings stirring beneath the surface, trust, admiration, longing, but both felt them clearly. The palace had become more than walls of stone. It was a crucible where their bond was tested, refined, and strengthened. That night, as the moon rose high above the castle towers, the first sign of the curse's awakening appeared. Shadows moved through the halls, whispering in voices no human could hear. Doors slammed shut, candles flickered violently, and an icy wind swept through the chambers, chilling every corner. Leora felt it immediately, the presence of something ancient, powerful, and dangerous. She clutched her staff tightly, sensing the bond with Kale guiding her. Kale appeared at her side, his power flaring like a dark storm. "It has awakened," he said. "The curse knows we are together. It will not allow this bond to exist without challenge." Leora took a deep breath. "Then we will face it together." The first attack came swiftly. A figure wreathed in shadows emerged in the great hall. Its form shifted constantly, impossible to fully see, yet its power was undeniable. It lunged at Kale with a force that shook the floor. Without hesitation, Leora stepped forward, placing her hands on the ground and calling forth her magic. A protective barrier rose, glowing softly, blocking the shadow's assault. The force of the attack shook the barrier, but it held, and Kale surged forward, striking the shadow with controlled, precise bursts of power. The battle was unlike any they had faced before. The shadow seemed endless, splitting into multiple forms, each attacking with fury. Leora moved through the hall, countering the magic that threatened to overwhelm them. Kale's strength combined with hers, creating a synergy that neither had fully anticipated. The bond pulsed between them, guiding their movements, protecting them, and strengthening their resolve. Amid the chaos, Kale noticed a weakness in the shadow. "Leora," he called, "focus on the center. The core is where its power resides." Understanding immediately, Leora poured all her energy into the barrier, directing it toward the heart of the shadow. A brilliant light flared, and the shadow shrieked, twisting and writhing as the power of their combined bond pushed against it. The air shimmered, filled with the sound of energy clashing, until finally, with a final pulse of light, the shadow dissolved into nothingness. The great hall was silent once more. Candles flickered back to life, the wind stilled, and the oppressive chill lifted. Leora sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. Kale knelt beside her, his hand brushing hers gently. For a moment, words were unnecessary. The bond they shared spoke louder than any declaration could. "You did it," Kale said softly, his voice carrying awe and relief. We did it. Together, Leora looked up at him, her chest heaving, her eyes shining. We survived, but this is only the beginning, she said. She knew the curse was ancient and relentless. It might test them again in ways neither could yet imagine. Yet, for the first time, she felt hope. Together, they could face anything. Over the next days, the kingdom slowly returned to a fragile peace. Leora and Kale worked tirelessly, reinforcing the wards, training the guards, and preparing the people for the possibility of future threats. Their bond deepened with each passing moment. They no longer needed words to communicate in battle. The connection between them was instinctive, a subtle current that guided their actions and decisions. One evening, as the sky was painted with the fiery colors of sunset, Kale brought Leora to the castle balcony. The kingdom stretched out before them, fields and forests bathed in golden light. The danger had passed, but the weight of the past weeks had left its mark. You have changed everything, Kale said quietly, his eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. You saved the kingdom and you saved me. Leora felt a warmth in her chest, a mix of pride and something deeper. We saved each other, she replied. I have learned more about courage and strength in these weeks than I ever could have imagined. Kale reached out, taking her hand in his. The touch was electric and the bond pulsed between them, steady and strong. I never thought I could trust anyone like this, he admitted. But with you I do, completely. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Leora's heart raced, but she met his gaze steadily. And I trust you, she said simply. Not just as a king, but as a man. I trust you with everything. The connection between them, forged in danger, trials, and shared struggle, had reached its full strength. The shadows that had haunted Kale for generations had been challenged and weakened by the power of their bond. Yet both knew the kingdom's peace was always fragile, and the curse, though diminished, would never be fully gone. As they stood together, hand in hand, the first stars began to appear in the night sky. The castle was quiet, but the wind carried whispers from the past, reminders of the trials they had faced and the victories they had earned. Leora and Kale did not fear the future. They had faced darkness together and emerged stronger. In the days that followed, the kingdom flourished under their combined guidance. Kale learned to rule not just with strength, but with understanding and compassion. Leora, once a healer who walked quietly at the edges of the palace, became a trusted advisor and equal in the king's eyes. The bond between them was more than magic. It was trust, respect, and a growing love that neither could deny. One evening, as the moonlight bathed the castle in silver, Kale and Leora stood together in the garden where their journey had begun. The night was calm, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. They did not speak immediately, content to simply be near each other, feeling the bond that had grown stronger with every trial. You are extraordinary, Kale said finally, his voice quiet and full of emotion. I do not know what the future holds, but I know I want you by my side for every moment. Leora smiled softly, squeezing his hand. And I want to stand by you in every battle, every joy, and every shadow. We have faced darkness together. We will face whatever comes next together. The castle was still beneath them, the kingdom at peace, and the shadows that had once haunted the Alpha King's halls had been challenged, though never entirely defeated. But in their place was a new force, the bond between healer and king, tempered in trials, strengthened in courage, and rooted in trust. And as they looked out over Valdoria, hand in hand, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The fire beneath ice had been forged into a steady flame, a flame that would guide them, protect them, and endure through whatever darkness might return. In the quiet of the night, the palace seemed to hum with approval, as if the very stones recognized the union that had been forged. Leora and Kale, healer and king, had rewritten the destiny of the kingdom. And in their hearts, a new legend had begun, a legend of courage, trust, and a bond that could overcome any shadow. The stars shone brightly above, the wind whispered softly through the towers, and the bond between them pulsed with life and promise. The kingdom was safe, the curse had been challenged, and two hearts, once strangers, now stood united against the shadows that would always linger at the edges of their world. And so, in the heart of Valdoria, a healer and a king found not only victory, but each other, bound by trust, courage, and the first true spark of love, a bond that would endure no matter what the future held.